It was the night of Halloween, when the barrier between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, and an eerie mist hung in the air, shrouding the small town of Hollowbrook in an otherworldly ambiance. Children clad in costumes roamed the streets, and pumpkins adorned with sinister grins flickered with candlelight on every doorstep. Amelia, a single mother, had recently moved to Hollowbrook with her young daughter Lily, hoping for a fresh start. The old two-story house they rented on Wisteria Lane seemed perfect, charmingly rustic and boasting a history that stretched back a century. It was the perfect place to begin their new life, or so Amelia believed. As night fell and the moon cast an eerie glow over the town, Amelia and Lily prepared for the evening's festivities. Lily was a princess that year, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she twirled in her gown. The two carved pumpkins, their faces glowing with devilish delight. As the hour grew late, they set out into the town, eager to join in the Halloween revelry. But as they walked among the costumed crowds, an unsettling sensation crept over Amelia. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that they were being watched. Turning to Lily, she saw a small hooded figure dart behind a building. Dismissing it as her imagination playing tricks on her, she carried on. The night wore on, and the town's eerie ambiance grew more pronounced. Residents whispered of strange occurrences like doors opening and closing on their own, and spectral figures glimpsed in windows. But it was Halloween, and such tales were expected on a night when the veil between the worlds was thin. Amelia and Lily returned home, where Lily excitedly began to sort through her candy haul. It wasn't long before they heard it, a faint, haunting melody that seemed to emanate from the depths of the old house. It was a lullaby, one that Amelia recognized but couldn't quite place. The melody grew louder, filling the house with an eerie presence. Amelia followed the sound to the attic, its narrow staircase concealed behind a forgotten door. As she ascended, the melody reached its crescendo, and Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She pushed open the attic door to a scene that would haunt her dreams for years to come. In the dim light of the attic, she saw an antique cradle gently swaying back and forth. Its sides were etched with intricate carvings, and within a porcelain doll lay, her glassy eyes fixed on Amelia. The doll's voice, sweet and yet unnerving, sang the lullaby with haunting beauty. Amelia reached for the doll, her fingers trembling. As her hand brushed against the porcelain, a rush of memories flooded her mind. A forgotten childhood, an old lullaby, and the attic of her grandmother's house. The doll had been hers as a child, and it had vanished without explanation. In her shock, Amelia barely noticed the room around her. Ancient toys, dusty trinkets, and a photograph. It was a faded image of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Amelia. Beneath the photo, the words Amelia and Lily were scrawled in a child's handwriting. With her heart pounding, Amelia rushed downstairs to Lily's room, where she found her daughter fast asleep, her princess costume hanging by the bed. She couldn't help but wonder if the lullaby had been meant for her, to remind her of the past she had forgotten. But as she turned to leave, a soft voice, the same as the doll's, whispered in her ear, "Happy Halloween, Amelia. Don't forget." Amelia gasped, and when she looked back at Lily, she saw her daughter was now holding the porcelain doll in her sleep. In that eerie Halloween night, the boundaries between the past and the present, the living and the dead, seemed to blur. Amelia and Lily had stepped into a world where memories, forgotten and rediscovered, were intertwined with the supernatural. As they drifted into an uneasy sleep, the lullaby continued to haunt their dreams, a reminder that some secrets are best left buried, even on the night when the living and the dead walk side by side. Hollow Grove, a sleepy town nestled in the heart of New England, was known for its picturesque landscapes, charming neighborhoods, and rich history. But there was one place that cast a perpetual shadow over the town: the Hollow Grove Cemetery. It was a place where generations of the deceased found their final rest, and where stories of the supernatural were whispered from one generation to the next. It all began on a crisp, moonlit Halloween night. A group of teenagers, led by adventurous Sarah, gathered at the cemetery's wrought iron gates. Armed with flashlights and a daring spirit, they intended to explore the graveyard and debunk the tales that had spooked them for years. The cemetery was old, its tombstones weathered by time and inscriptions barely legible. It was said to be cursed by a vengeful spirit, the ghost of Abigail Dunham, a woman accused of witchcraft and hung during the infamous Salem witch trials. The townsfolk believed that her spirit still roamed the cemetery, seeking revenge on those who dared to disturb her eternal slumber. As the teens ventured deeper into the cemetery, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The wind whispered through the trees and shadows danced among the tombstones. But their courage held steady, and they laughed off their unease as mere superstition. Their laughter came to a sudden halt when they reached the old Dunham family plot. A large, gnarled oak tree loomed over it, its branches twisted like gnarled fingers. Underneath, a weathered tombstone bore the name Abigail Dunham and a chilling epitaph. Here lies the accused, cursed in life and death. Sarah, undaunted by the ominous inscription, dared her friends to participate in a seance to prove once and for all that the curse was a myth. They circled around the tombstone, their hands joined, and chanted eerie incantations they'd found on an old scroll of parchment. Suddenly, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and a cold wind swept through the clearing. The teens tried to break the circle, but their hands remained locked. Whispers filled the air, and as they looked toward the tombstone, a figure, ghostly and ethereal, materialized. It was Abigail Dunham, her spectral eyes filled with anger. The teens screamed, panic overtaking them as they struggled to free themselves from the unbreakable circle. Abigail's voice echoed in their minds, accusing them of disturbing her eternal rest. She vowed vengeance for their trespass. In a desperate bid to escape, they called upon the spirits they'd unwittingly awakened. In an instant, the world around them transformed. The cemetery dissolved, and they found themselves in a dark, tangled forest. Their flashlights flickered and died, leaving them shrouded in darkness. One by one, the spirits of the forest began to appear, their faces twisted in agony. They were the lost souls of those who had dared to venture into the Hollow Grove Cemetery, now forever trapped in this spectral realm. These tormented souls warned the teenagers of the curse that had befallen them, a curse that bound them to the forest for eternity. Terrified and desperate, the teens begged for mercy, but Abigail Dunham's curse was unrelenting. Their pleas fell on deaf ears as they too began to change, becoming spectral entities themselves, eternally bound to the cursed forest. Back in the cemetery, a group of townspeople gathered to find the gate to the Hollow Grove Cemetery locked, sealed with an eerie, unbreakable seal. They could hear the whispers of the tormented souls beyond the gate, a chilling reminder of the curse that had taken the adventurous teens. Every year on Halloween night, the curse of Abigail Dunham awakened. The tormented souls wandered the cursed forest, seeking to expand their spectral ranks. Those who ventured too close to the cemetery could hear their whispers, their pleas for release from their eternal torment. The town of Hollow Grove was forever changed by that fateful Halloween night. The Hollow Grove Cemetery became a place of dread, and the legend of Abigail Dunham's curse served as a warning to all who dared to disturb the slumber of the dead. The townspeople, who had once been skeptical of the stories, now avoided the cemetery at all costs, knowing that the boundary between the living and the dead was at its thinnest on Halloween night, and the curse of Abigail Dunham remained an eternal nightmare for those who dared to cross that threshold. In the heart of Salem, Massachusetts, the town notorious for its witch trials in the 17th century, there stood a relic of the past that sent shivers down the spine of the locals: the Witch's Bell Tower. It was a structure that had endured centuries of turmoil and tales of the supernatural, casting an eerie shadow over the town. The tower's origin was a subject of much debate, but most agreed that it was constructed by the infamous Judge Hawthorne, a central figure in the Salem witch trials. It was believed to have been a place of both execution and confinement for those accused of practicing witchcraft. Local legends whispered of the bell that once hung within the tower, which had supposedly been cast from the melted silver of the accused witch's belongings. As Halloween approached one year, a group of 4 friends decided to spend the night in the Witch's Bell Tower, a dare fueled by the bravado that accompanies the season. Sam, the ringleader of the group, had heard tales of the tower's haunting since childhood, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The night was cold, the moon casting an eerie glow over the town. The group arrived at the tower with flashlights and a sense of anticipation. As they climbed the winding stone staircase to the top, They felt the weight of history bearing down on them. Cobwebs clung to the walls, and the air grew heavy with every step. Reaching the top of the tower, they were greeted by a chilling sight: an old bell covered in dust and cobwebs, its clapper missing. As they explored the tower, an unsettling feeling settled over them, and a sense of being watched grew impossible to ignore. As the night wore on, strange occurrences began to unfold. Whispers echoed through the tower, eerie shadows danced along the walls, and the air grew icy. The group tried to convince themselves that it was merely their imaginations running wild, but the unease persisted. At the stroke of midnight, the group decided to conduct a seance, a daring challenge to the restless spirits they believed inhabited the tower. Sam produced a makeshift Ouija board and they gathered around, their fingers resting lightly on the planchette. As they began to ask questions, the planchette began to move, spelling out cryptic messages. The responses grew increasingly hostile, and the atmosphere in the tower grew oppressive. It became clear that they had awakened something malevolent. The group's initial bravado turned to fear, and they desperately tried to end the seance. But the planchette continued to move, spelling out warnings and threats from the spirit they had summoned. Panic set in, and they realized that they were not in control. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and a shadowy figure emerged, taking form before their eyes. It was the spirit of Abigail Dunham, a victim of the Salem witch trials. She was dressed in tattered garments, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Abigail accused the group of disrespecting the tower and disturbing her eternal rest. She spoke of the suffering she and the other accused witches had endured. Their anguish had manifested into a curse that would torment anyone who dared to enter the tower. Terrified, the group pleaded for mercy, but Abigail's spirit was unrelenting. She informed them that they would be bound to the tower as protectors of its dark history. The group's fates were sealed, and they became spectral guardians of the witch's bell tower, unable to leave its confines. The sun rose on a new day, and the group was forever changed. They were no longer of the living, but had become part of the tower's haunting. The townspeople soon heard of their fate, and the witch's bell tower was forever marked as a place of dread. Every year on Halloween night, the group's spectral forms could be seen within the tower, serving as a warning to anyone who dared to enter. The witch's bell tower remained an enduring reminder of the dark history of Salem and the curses that could be awakened on Halloween night. As Halloween approached each year, the town's residents would hear the bell tolling from the tower, a reminder of the malevolent spirits that guarded its history and the cursed souls forever bound to the witch's bell tower.